Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 9 of Gotham called Harvey Dent. Excuse me? Anyway, this character, of course, introduces us to Harvey Dent, a very well-known member of the Batman mythos, of course, the future Two-Face. And for an episode with his name on the title, reminiscent of episode 2, which was, of course, Selina Kyle, we don't actually spend a huge amount of time with Harvey. But before we get to him, I actually want to make sure to talk about two of the lesser characters this episode, and then we'll come back to Harvey. First of all, I imagine a lot of you out there are probably like me with the whole, at this point, with Barbara, and it's just like, man, F this lady. Seriously. It's been at most 2, maybe 3 days since she left Gordon, and she's already over in Montoya's bed. And never mind the fact that, Gordon is, Montoya's ally. I mean, man. I mean, I really sort of feel bad for these characters because I have the feeling that the writers and the people behind the show just really do not realize just how unintentionally unsympathetic they're really making these two people. Now, in all fairness, Barbara Gordon, the mother in the comics, was not somebody who's ever really been fleshed out very much. I think I've only ever really seen some recent issues of Batgirl that kind of brought her back into Barbara Gordon, Batgirl's life, and really kind of did some things with her character. For the most part, in the comics, we've just basically seen Gordon's been divorced. It's mostly been about his relationship with his daughter. And yes, they have merged some elements with, Batwoman from the current Batwoman from the comics, especially the relationship with Montoya. But again, it just really feels like they're trying to go out of their way to make the fans hate her. And this is especially sad in the case of Montoya, who in the comics is really kick-ass. I mean, yeah, she is a very messed up woman. She has problems with alcohol addiction, and a lot of really crazy bad crap happens to her. But at the end of the day, she's also a really kick-butt superhero, and really just cool in general. Here, it's just like, man, screw the both of them. They're horrible people. Also, on the opposite end of that, this episode we actually see not only Bullock, we actually see Bullock be nice to Nigma. I mean, he even thanks him, which, it's very much a contrast to the way we see him act normally when he's just sort of, being rude and being a dick to Edward for, partly because Eddie doesn't know how to turn off those eccentricities of his. But for the most part, Eddie is actually very good at his job. So to see Bullock actually give him a little bit of acknowledgement to that when he has genuinely earned it, that's a nice moment for both those characters. And nothing particular besides that to say about Bullock this episode, although it was nice to see Gordon actually kind of confiding in him about what happened with Barbara. And again, it shows that, yeah, there are definitely some rocks in these guys' relationship, but that they are genuinely becoming friends. And let's face it, circumstances have basically forced them to be allies as well. But anyway, bringing things back to Harvey Dent. Now, a lot of people I saw complaining on Twitter is like, oh, they're shadowing it. The lighting in that scene is shadowing it so that half his face is in darkness, or he's, the first 10 seconds we see him, he's playing around with his coin. This show has no subtlety at all. Okay, this no subtlety thing is one that I've seen leveled at Gotham more than once. And I'll grant you, this is not a subtle show. But let's remember, this is a comic book show. And superhero comics are not big on subtlety. Alright? Superhero comics are big on people busting through walls, people giving long monologues at moments that are really not terribly appropriate, and lots of people shouting. And, shooting lasers out of their eyes and all this other crazy stuff. Comic books are basically reality turned up to the nth degree in a lot of ways. And, in general, so is television drama. So, yeah, also keep in mind that they have to do a lot of these things just for the people who really don't know Batman all that well. They're like, oh, yeah, there's Two-Face, and here's a guy who was burnt, half his face is burned and messed up, and he was in, the second Christopher Nolan Batman movie. But they might not remember that his real name is Harvey Dent and all of this other stuff. So, again, they do have to sort of play a lot to the regular Joes out there who only have the most basic knowledge of Batman. So you do things like that, people very quickly understand, oh yeah, this guy is one day going to be Two-Face. And again, as I have said in more than one of my reviews, not just on Gotham, but just in general, subtlety is lost on most people. All right, most people just do not get subtlety. So you basically kind of have to make sure that it's front and clear as possible. You have to a lot of television writing is basically making things idiot proof, so that people who maybe have missed a few episodes when they come back to a show are not confused, and that if you introduce a character from an established mythology, that people can pick up who this is quite quickly. And yes, some people don't like this, and I can understand why. But honestly, I think a lot of it is people are just looking for something to complain about. I mean, really, I think that a lot of the people who complain about there's no subtlety in this, well, if they had something subtle, would probably be like, they could have been more clear about it. But that's what I get for reading Twitter during the commercials. I guess I'm a bit of a masochist on that one. But anyway, I was reading an interview with Nicholas, difficult to pronounce last name, who plays Harvey Dent earlier today, and he was talking about the character, and he did say some very interesting things that sort of make a lot of what was going on in this episode I think a little more clear. And one of them is that one thing that they're doing is that Harvey, like you see this episode, that the darkness that will eventually turn Harvey into Two-Face is already there. And they say that one of the things that has been decided that really brings that out is people threatening him. And this has a lot to do with Harvey Dent's past from the comics, where he was routinely physically abused by his father as a child. And part of that whole flipping the coin thing comes from his dad saying, okay, if you call this one correctly, I won't beat the hell out of you today. So again, the actor, he has done his research on Two-Face, so he understands where some of this is coming from. But I liked one of the ways he really described it is that basically Harvey is a guy who's a risk taker. He's willing to gamble, like what he's doing there with the bad guy of this episode, Lovecraft. I mean, Harvey's really taken some serious risks. He even says that he's basically risking his career with what he's doing here. And then he can also, and I really like the way that Nicholas whatever put it, is that Harvey's one of those guys that can go off like a loaded gun. You can just be cruising along, and then you hit one of those things that makes Harvey go nuts, and you get the screaming and shouting thing. And yes, people have noted that a prosecutor screaming threats at somebody in front of his lawyers would probably result in some very serious consequences here in the real world. But as we've seen, Gotham operates under its own certain set of rules, and one has to imagine that's also true at the prosecutor's office, where so basically subtle and not so subtle threats are just kind of the way things are done in Gotham. And well, let's face it, the guy's witnesses are all his own attorneys, so not exactly unbiased. I mean, somebody like experience like, oh, so the people who witnessed this are all people who you pay exorbitant amounts of money to on a regular basis and have a vested interest in your well-being. Yeah, you don't really need to have gone to law school to see how any reasonably competent lawyer could poke a lot of holes in that. So let's kind of continue on with Harvey. Now, this episode, we also see him starting to form his relationship with Gordon. He's introduced as basically somebody in the prosecutor's office who's like Gordon, somebody who wants to clean up Gotham, who's willing to take risks. I mean, look at what Gordon did a couple episodes ago, Penguin's Umbrella, I believe it was. And this is in keeping with the Batman mythology, where in the early days of Batman, it was once he had kind of established a relationship with Gordon, he also formed one with Harvey Dent. They were kind of a sort of a triumvirate. The prosecutor, the police, the vigilante, all working together to try and clean up Gotham. And then things really went to hell. If you really want to get a good take on this idea, go read Batman: The Long Halloween. It really gets into that early relationship with Gordon, Dent, and Batman, and really fleshes it out a lot. You see just how that Batman really did consider Harvey Dent both an ally and a friend, and of course this makes his transformation into Two-Face all the more horrible. And honestly, it's just a really, really good Batman story in general. It's actually one of my all-time favorite Batman stories. So let's see. Yeah, I kind of think that covers everything that I had to say about Harvey this episode. Nothing too terribly particular to say about Gordon. Again, just a lot of this episode is him forming his relationship with Harvey. A little bit more of him, dealing with Alfred. And, of course, him sort of dealing with the fallout of Barbara leaving him. And those scenes between him and Selina, those continue to be very, very cute. I think Gordon does respect Selina quite a bit. I mean, he even puts it well that she's a kid who's seen too much. And he's also picked up that Selina is a very clever kid. So, despite her only being about 13 years old, and remember, she did successfully sucker him and leave him down in a sewer. So I think Selina has earned a certain amount of professional respect from Gordon. And yeah, let's see. Well, yeah, let's go over and talk about Selina. So this is another really nice episode where she gets to formally meet Bruce Wayne. And the dynamic between these two is really, really great. She picks up that Bruce is sweet on her pretty much immediately. And, I have to like this. I really like the idea of Catwoman being Batman's first crush. I mean, it's just cute on a lot of levels, and you don't really get cute in Batman. But seeing them sort of bounce off each other, I mean, it's really good. I mean, they did find two very, very good young actors for these characters, and I've really gushed about Carmen, also difficult to pronounce last name before. I mean, this kid really is a find. But what I really like is that while Alfred is teaching Bruce stuff like the boxing and helping him with the holding his breath thing, Selina's also teaching him. She does bring some very valid points that out in the streets of Gotham people fight with guns, not their fists, and that you have to be ruthless to survive in Gotham. But what I think a lot of people might miss, though, is that Bruce is also correct that willpower, what he's doing there with the swimming pool, that's something that you need in life in general, but especially if you're going to be Batman. And the whole thing with him holding his breath. Well, being able to hold his breath for a really long time has saved Batman's life on multiple occasions, from bad guys who are using poison gas or trying to drown him. And, well, yeah, people do, of course, use guns plenty in Gotham. But that doesn't mean that knowing how to fight with your fists is not a valuable skill to have. After all, not every bad guy in the world has a gun, and, well, let's say you successfully get a gun away from a bad guy. It doesn't mean that that person doesn't know how to use their fists, too. And it is established in the mythology that Batman is one of the greatest fighters in the world. He is in fact not considered the best. And if I remember my lore correctly, it's actually Lady Shiva, Sandra Wu Sen, who is considered the best martial artist in the world. She's incidentally also evil, and has been a reoccurring enemy for Batman, Black Canary, Batgirl on multiple occasions. But that's neither here nor there. Although if you think about it, her in a very early incarnation is totally somebody who would work workable on Gotham. But anyway, so The big thing here, of course, is though that we do get to see that Selena is not exactly a great mesh with the life that goes on at Wayne Manor, but she does succeed in actually being the first person to really to get Bruce to act like a kid again. And that's what turns Alfred around on her. She sees that, yeah, this girl is definitely rough around the edges, but she does bring some of the humanity out in Bruce again. She brings back, the child in him. And remember, Bruce is 12, she's 13. They're both kids who have seen too much, as Gordon put it in regards to Selena. But it's also shown that they're both very intelligent, very resourceful kids, much more mature than their age. But at the end of the day, they're still at most 6th or 7th graders. And that if they're to have any real hope for themselves as adults, there still needs to be some child in them. It is interesting when we're growing up. A lot of us have a moment that people like to point to as the moment that you lose your innocence. And, well, we know what it is for Bruce. What it is for Selena is a little unclear. And, but we do see that she still has that. She, goofs around with Bruce, and she tells what's obviously a ridiculous lie about what's going on with her mother being the stage magician's secret agent. You kind of get the impression that this is some sort of a lie that Selena might have told to herself when she was very small in order to just not accept a rather nasty truth, whatever it might be. Although I did get a laugh about her talking about her mom being a magician. For a second, I'm like, Zatanna? It's like, no, we're not going to get that. Although it would be pretty cool if we did get, young kid Zatanna at some point. Not, don't do anything in regards to magic, because obviously that doesn't fit with what we're doing here on Gotham. But it would still be pretty fun. And there was even a story in the comics where Zatanna and Bruce did meet as kids. They are roughly about the same age. And that was very cute. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying about losing people losing innocence. That is really always a kind of a defining moment, and it is sort of, I think, inevitable for everybody. I very clearly kind of remember when that happened to me. And the long and the short version is, I think I was probably about 11 years old, and I was talking to a kid at school one day, and I said, well, hey, where's so-and-so? I haven't seen him around for a while. Is he sick? And the guy goes to me, oh, no, he doesn't go here anymore. And I said, well, why? What happened? Did he move? And he told me, no, that kid's father was arrested for raping his sister. Now keep in mind, at the time I was 11 years old. I only had the most vague, basic idea of what sex was. I don't think until that time I had ever even heard the word rape. And I still remember that moment, those gears turning in my head. And then it dawns on me. And I remember that moment if the world suddenly felt very large and very dark and very cold. And I felt very, very small. And all I could say to that other kid after he told me that was, oh. Yeah, growing up, it's not easy. Okay, so on that cheerful note, let's see, what else do we have to talk about? Yes, Penguin. First of all, I do love the fact that they are basically giving the best music on Gotham to Penguin. He got that very Sherlock-esque sort of music a couple episodes ago, and then this episode where he's screwing around with in Liza's room. It is really very, very memorable. And of course, then we do get to see that those scenes with him and Fish Mooney and him with Eliza, and again we see Penguin is a smart guy. And I really like that scene between, well, one, the scene with him and Liza basically shows that, yeah, Penguin's got her under his thumb now too. And that scene with Fish was cool simply because it shows us that Fish is continuing to basically just see Oswald as the glorified umbrella carrier. She is completely and utterly underestimating Oswald, and that's going to be her downfall, folks. Penguins eat fish. Remember that. Of course, Fish herself is shown to be no slouch in this episode as well. She sort of, helps the Russians mastermind this whole thing to steal all this money from Falcone. And what I really like is that she even says to Butch, her right-hand man, that she didn't care about the money. And I imagine there's some people out there who are confused by this. Let me lay it out for you. Yeah, Falcone having that money stolen, that would have hurt him. But remember, it was the Russians stealing the money. They never said anything about Fish giving even Fish a share about this. That was very much a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's probably what Gregor, the leader of the Russians, was thinking. And I assume that he was Nikolai's replacement. But anyway, what happens here, and the reason why it's good that Butch blew all the Russians up, is that one, they can't basically, word can't get back to Falcone that Fish helped the Russians. But now Nikolai's dead. Gregor, who's almost certainly his appointed successor, is also dead and has been caught red-handed betraying Falcone. So this means that whoever is in the territory that was controlled by the Russians are going to need a new boss. And Fish basically said in episode 1, if she's going to take down Falcone, she needs more territory, more men, and more money. So she wasn't going to get any of the money from that robbery. But now she's in a very good position to present herself as somebody that Falcone can give the Russians territory to. That'll earn her the men, the money, and territory she needs to continue to gear up and build for that eventual strike on Falcone, and make her the Queen of Gotham. And remember that truck of money did blow up, so yeah, some of it's probably going to be recovered, but blown up money is no good to Falcone either. So it's all coming up Fish Mooney in this episode, basically. The only downside for her is that she sort of brushed Penguin aside when she really should be taking him more seriously. I also really liked how just before the bomb went off, the music that played there, if you don't recognize it, it's a song from a band called Europe called The Final Countdown. Came out back in 1986. And it's a pretty epic song. Very, very 80s, but very enjoyable. Let's see, what else? There's something else I want. Oh yeah, Ian, the bomber guy. Now, what they do with him is interesting. Is that he's really is just portrayed exactly as his brother said. That Ian is not a bad guy. He's a guy who is sick. His brother even says Ian has suffered from mental problems since he was a kid. He took pains to make sure that nobody was hurt by those bombs. And when he did eventually kill some people with those bombs, it was because it was an accident. That's what got him thrown in Blackgate. Now, yes, he did kill those security guards, but again, he was forced to do that. He was forced to build the bomb. It was the Russians who dropped the bomb off there and did it in such a way that it killed the guards. And of course, all this eventually ends in the mayor taking all the mentally disturbed inmates out of Blackgate Prison, which is the prison in Gotham in the comics, and throwing them into Arkham. And Gordon is upset by this because he even points out, like, Arkham's a beat up old building that is in no way, shape, or form prepared to serve as a genuinely helpful institute for mentally disturbed people. I mean, this guy really genuinely might have been better off in Blackgate, because we know Arkham is just destined to be this absolute and utter hellhole. I mean, there was one of the most famous. There's a really famous graphic novel called Arkham Asylum: Living Hell. And that's basically what Arkham is meant to be. It is basically meant to be like something out of Dante's Inferno, a place where evil and madness rule, where anybody who gets sent there is just basically completely and utterly doomed. Nobody gets better in Arkham. They only get worse. And that's not just the patients. Doctors and staff have more than once gone crazy and become bad guys. I mean, the most famous example, of course, being Harley Quinn. Jeremiah Arkham, same thing happened to him. I forget exactly what his real name, but one of the former heads of Arkham Security became a villain. Lockup. Really nice episode of Batman the Animated Series introduced him, and then they brought him over to the comics. And the really awesome thing about what happens there is that this ends up being Gordon's fault. He's the one that gets in the mayor's face and basically prompts the mayor to do this. So in a lot of ways, Gordon, the guy who wants to clean up Gotham, to make the city a good place, plays an enormous part in building this breeding ground for psychopaths and lunatics who are going to terrorize and murder their way across Gotham for years on end. And Gordon is basically the one who's responsible for this happening. I mean, yeah, the mayor's the one that ordered it, but he did it because of what Gordon said to him. I do like the fact that the mayor just sort of gave Gordon that look. It's like, man, I really don't like you. I mean, that is some beautiful, dark irony right there. And, yeah, guys, that's all I really have to say about this episode. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And until next time, take care and have a good one.